present today's speaker. This portion of our webcast is being recorded, and you'll be able to come back and listen to it later. Your questions will also be captured this way. Just to reintroduce myself, my name is Jeff Kramer. I am a Senior Research Associate with the CUTR Planning and Corridor Management Program, and it's my pleasure to introduce Karen Sagerman, who is a Senior Research Associate in the same program as me at CUTR, the Planning and Corridor Management Program. Ms. Sagerman has 30 years of experience in urban and regional planning with expertise in really quite a wide variety of areas, including growth management, transportation concurrency, mobility fees, mobility planning, access management, corridor preservation, land development regulation, telecommunications facility siting, public involvement, and of course MPO systems planning. And also land use law. Prior to joining the CUTR faculty, she worked as a national zoning manager for American Tower Corporation and also as a transportation planner for the Polk Transportation Planning Organization. That is the MPO that covers the Lakeland, Winter Haven urbanized areas in Central Florida. Ms. Sagerman holds a master's degree in urban planning from the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign. She is a member of the American Institute of Certified Planners, the Institute of Transportation Engineers, American Planning Association, the Congress of New Urbanism, the Institute of Transportation, and the Institute of Transportation Engineers here, Florida section. Ms. Sagerman was named the 2009 Transportation Professional of the Year by the Florida section of ITE, and was a recipient of the 2004 FAPA Award of Excellence for her work in multimodal transportation policy. She's going to talk to us today about a study she conducted, a long-range transportation plan review. I'll turn that over to Karen at this point.
Thank you, Jeff. Good afternoon, and thanks to everyone for attending our lunchtime webcast. Today I am going to talk about long-range transportation planning, but from an MPO perspective. The study I completed last year, actually it was early in 2013, was a review of Florida MPO long-range transportation plans and estimate of the statewide 2035 metropolitan area financial shortfall. To start us out, I'm going to remind you that every urbanized area with more than 50,000 people as defined by the U.S. Census must be part of an MPO. An MPO may include more than one urbanized area, and an urbanized area may be covered by more than one MPO. In Florida, there are 26 MPOs covering 28 urbanized areas. All are part of 39 counties and more than 94% of Florida's population. Now, those numbers are in relation to the plans that were reviewed for this study. With the 2010 census, some of those figures have changed, but for the purposes of this report today, those are the numbers we're looking at. As I said, this report was prepared in 2012 and the beginning of 2013. It's the fourth review of long-range transportation plans that has been done by CUTR. Previous plans were reviewed in 97, 2002, and 2008. As I mentioned, there are 26 MPOs in Florida. 25 plans were reviewed for this study because two MPOs did a joint plan. That would be the Martin MPO and the St. Lucie County TPO. The methodology involved gathering of each plan, getting a copy of each plan, and reading through them and noting the different changes from past practices, new ideas, and some of the best practices that we see throughout those plans. We also collected data to perform a statewide funding shortfall calculation. Our report begins with observations of planning practice. In looking through all of the plans, what was it that we saw within the plans that were most notable? First of all, MPOs are developing very readable, friendly formats. By and large, plans used to be very technical documents, and over time they certainly have become something more readable. They were all it's also very easily downloadable from the internet. Although we ask MPOs to provide us with a hard copy of their plan, I would say only about 30% did so. The rest of them either sent us a CD or basically said, just download it from the website. They're all out on the website and can be accessed. Some examples of good formats within plans included things like an individual project map, project description with a map. In many plans, you'll see a list of projects merely listed out in kind of a table format. But in this particular example from Collier County, individual projects were described in detail with a map locating that particular project within the urbanized area. Another example from Hillsborough County was a section on how information was used in shaping the plan. At the end of each chapter, there would be a paragraph that basically described to the reader how the information was used in shaping the plan. The next observation was that many MPOs described their 2035 plan as a major change or shift from previous plans due to various factors, such as addressing multiple modes, emphasizing transit, testing land use scenarios, or optimizing the performance of existing facilities. This shift was noted not only in things that are in their plans, but also in things like their titles. One of them, like the Broward MPO, called their plan Transformation because they were really talking about a great change from focus on roadway improvements to transit improvements. Another from Gainesville called theirs the Livable Community Reinvestment Plan, showing their focus on trying to create a livable community environment. And there, of course, were many other examples of interesting titles that basically encapsulized the vision. Another observation was the attention to transportation land use connection that was evident throughout the LRTPs. Many tied their transportation and land use connection to a vision plan. It might be a regional vision plan or a county-wide vision plan. Others looked at land use scenarios. One of the more popular things to look at was the historical trend versus infill alternatives. An example is from the Capital Region TPA. They accomplished the integration of transportation and land use through several coordinated efforts, including scenario planning, the development of 5 sector plans, and conceptual corridor planning. They had 3 high-level options they considered. One was business as usual, obviously just continuing growth the way it had been going. The second option being quality growth, where they had development patterns which focused on more compact, dense development in areas identified through the public involvement process and in coordination with local planning staff. The scenario also included a more extensive consideration of community resources, including environmental, cultural, and historic assets. Their third option was called Quality Growth Plus, and this scenario incorporated more intensive and exceptional growth management strategies than the second scenario. For example, higher densities in compact areas and more extensive emphasis on the preservation of community resources. The second example I draw your attention to is what's pictured here on your screen. This is a map from the Sarasota-Manatee MPO LRTP, and they performed a regional and corridor approach in 11 defined corridors, and you can see their defined corridors in there in different colors, and they're, you can sort of maybe read the what facilities they are related to. The objective of this corridor level analysis is to determine the best mix of mobility and accessibility strategies given the economic opportunities and land use objectives in that corridor. They also looked at the transportation network characteristics, including gaps, barriers, and constraints. Our next observation of planning practice involved the plans emphasizing and reinforcing regional planning efforts. Many LRTPs looked at transportation authorities, regional transportation authorities, or RTAs, an example being TBARTA, the Tampa Bay Regional Transportation Authority. All the MPOs within the areas covered by this authority did mention this TBARTA plan and included elements of it that they could. Also related to this Regional Transportation Authority plan is the Regional Long-Range Transportation Plan of the West Central Florida MPO Chairs Coordinating Committee, and that's made up of the MPOs in this area as well. It also noted that the Sarasota Manatee MPO plan credited the TBARTA plan with sparking a greater interest in regional and local major transit investments. So whereas they may not have been looking at them before, this particular regional plan caused them to look more closely at those regional transit investments. Another observation of regional planning efforts involved the joint MPO plans, which I had mentioned early in this discussion, with the example of the Martin MPO and the St. Lucie TPO combining their plans. We also saw some other efforts where some MPOs may have gone together to do modeling together or certain parts of their plans, but didn't necessarily combine them in the end. Transit certainly became a serious competitor for transportation dollars. We saw a lot more money going toward transit projects in this set of plans than had previously been seen. Public involvement efforts revealed that citizens sought transit as an alternative to automobile travel and indicated that a greater portion of transportation funds should be spent on transit. For an example of things that were included in the plans were more in-depth transit analysis and a look beyond the transit development plan. As we know, the Transit Development Plan only covers 10 years, and although MPOs certainly refer to those plans and the transit efforts within them for 10 years, some of them looked into that following 10 years beyond that, and others looked past what the TDP said and said, oh, if we really want to do something, can we do something even more than is in our Transit Development Plan? So that was very interesting. The Broward MPO placed an emphasis on mass transit and reflected that in the needs plan when they considered the possibility of 3 separate transit scenarios. They considered rapid bus, rapid transit, and light rail transit. So they had 3 different scenarios that they tested and costed out. And of course, what they could implement was going to be based on what type of funding they could obtain. Numerous freight studies throughout the state provided substance to LRTP freight discussions. Freight has certainly been growing throughout the state, and certain MPOs provided detailed discussions incorporating data, analysis, and recommendations from regional freight or regional goods movement studies. Details that support freight mobility include regional goods movement corridors, local truck routes, and hotspots, which are locations with high accidents or difficulty in truck maneuvering. An example, as you can see here on the slide, is from Miami. They show their freight improvements there on the map. They developed 11 different goals in regard to freight. Candidate improvements were identified by developing a consolidated inventory of existing projects and comparing the inventory of projects in relation to needs addressed through data analysis, stakeholder input, and consistency with the freight plan and LRTP goals and objectives. Faced with diminishing funds to meet increasing transportation needs, MPOs worked creatively to optimize existing transportation facilities as well as enhance community livability. And it couldn't be better said than the Sarasota-Manatee MPO said in their plan. There is very limited funding to construct significant capacity expansions, so the key strategies in the plan focus on optimizing the performance and safety of existing facilities, preserving the capacity of the existing system, reducing vehicle miles of travel through integrated land use and transportation strategies, creating and supporting existing markets for transit, and enabling more bicycling and walking through roadway retrofits and expansion of non-auto facilities. They kind of said it all. They're basically saying, you know, we've got to do something differently. They talked about different retrofits they made. We saw it in several different plans, talking about how to focus on a whole corridor and make that corridor work the best that they could using transit and pedestrian activities and some access management to maximize the capacity of the corridor as it existed without going through the extreme cost of it getting additional right-of-way to add additional lanes to a corridor. They also looked at a lot of intelligent transportation system strategies, and they even scaled down projects. And one example of that was also in Sarasota-Manatee, where the MPO board voted to modify the 6-lane widening strategy for the expensive southern segment of the Venice bypass. Instead, they decided to do advanced right-of-way and construction funding for a reconstruction, as well as rehabilitation and intersection improvements along the segment, and maintain the 4 through travel lanes. The result was a substantially lower project cost estimate of $25 million. They lowered that cost by about half. By lowering this cost, the MPO was able to advance the project from the outer years of the LRTP to a near-term implementation time. So that worked out well for them to use the funding that they had and scale down the project to something that would still work. The process for prioritizing projects and moving them from the needs plan to the cost feasible plan, it was becoming clearer. In the past, it was not always clear how MPOs were actually taking all of the projects they had identified in their needs plan and were deciding what to fund within their cost feasible plan. Examples of this include the North Florida TPO, which tied evaluation criteria and scoring to goals and objectives, which is a pretty common method. On the screen here, you see an example from the Polk TPO. On the right-hand side is a table that details the scoring criteria that's applied to each project. The point assignment is associated with each criterion, corresponds with the project's anticipated impact, both positive and negative. And then once they came up with those scores, on the left, the smaller table, I could point that out here for you, the smaller table here, actually gave them a weighted score. So they would use the raw score from the first table and then give some weight to these different criteria, such as multimodal system development, environmental sustainability, regional support, freight and goods movement. So they actually gave a weight to the scores to help them determine how to move projects from the needs plan to the cost feasible plan. Public participation efforts continue to evolve with the use of social media and recognition that some approaches prove more effective than others. Certainly, most of the MPOs were using websites, some did radio and TV, and definitely made the foray into social media, which again, this covers plans that were in place from 2009 through 2012 or 13. So we know that social media was very much growing during that time. One of the most effective methods communities found was that if they attended a community event, such as a community fair or something that was going on, where they could set up a booth and people could come to it and they could talk them through their different planning efforts if they found to be most effective. Also, participation methods such as surveys and interactive activities seem to be popular mechanisms. In particular, a number of MPOs used an activity during which citizens were given a fictitious dollar amount, such as like $100, and were asked to determine how much money they would spend on each type of project or mode of transportation. Such input was then used as guidance regarding how much revenue should be spent on each mode. Environmental justice, it was commonly addressed, and a handful of MPOs directly analyzed the benefit to populations protected by Title VI. MPOs all reached out to low-income minorities and other communities protected by Title VI through targeted community events during their planning process. Most plans discussed environmental justice issues, and some mapped protected populations, and a few even identified the benefits of planned transportation projects to those populations. One example that you can see here is the Pasco County MPO included comparisons of highway lanes, miles and bus route miles, average travel times, and accessibility for areas with higher than average protected populations versus all other areas. And what you see on the screen here was from Hillsborough County. They illustrate the benefits of the planned projects to protected communities, including the measures as such measures as the number of bus route miles within economically disadvantaged neighborhoods and the percent of economically disadvantaged residents within a quarter mile of frequent transit stops. Safety and security remained very relevant within plans. All the MPOs certainly included elements from the DOT's State Highway Safety Plan that is out there. They certainly addressed hurricane evacuation, and many moved toward, not many, but a few moved towards security, addressing security threat issues. Many of the plans addressed large-scale terrorist attacks and natural disasters, and a few even referenced the importance of railroad security. The Space Coast TPO adopted a goal of improving security to be accomplished through objectives addressing system resilience, maintaining evacuation capability, and maintaining mobility. The plan included security threat scenarios and also established related performance measures and targets for meeting those security objectives. Also on the right-hand column, side over here, you can see that the Pinellas MPO created a project safety checklist. They use this checklist in reviewing each development plan that comes through. Does it meet their requirements for all of these different project safety requirements? And the final observation was that a few MPOs tackled complex emerging issues, and some of them also touched them indirectly, but some had touched them directly on. Quite a few MPOs included measures of effectiveness or other forms of performance measurement. Such measures were tied to plan, goals, and objectives, and used as a means to measure how varying cost-feasible alternatives advanced plan goals and objectives. A detailed section on peak oil production and decline scenarios was included in the Gainesville plan. Modeling included a scenario in which fuel prices rise substantially, resulting in a sharp decline in vehicle miles of travel. Both land use and transportation strategies to address this possibility were suggested. Land use strategies focused on location efficiency and modifying land use patterns with complementary transportation strategies. Another notable example is the Charlotte County Punta Gorda LRTP. they included a detailed chapter on hazard mitigation related to climate change, including development of a hazard profile. Transportation vulnerability analysis was conducted to identify cost-effective hazard mitigation actions that prevent, avoid, or reduce the impacts of a hazard on people, property, or the natural environment. And the final issue was that of aging road user safety, access, and mobility. The Volusia TPO estimated that by 2035, the population age 65 or older may be almost 28% of the county's population, and that travel behavior in this age group might be limited by their inability to own and or operate an automobile. So again, many MPOs are starting to look at this. How are we going to encourage these people to live in our communities and get them around the community so they continue to enjoy life? We also collected data regarding Florida's statewide funding shortfall. The statewide funding shortfall calculation is a comparison of the estimated transportation needs, or the needs cost, over the life of the plan to the estimated revenue over the same time period. The 20-year statewide funding shortfall from 2016 through 2035 is estimated to be $126.4 billion in 2009 dollars. This is approximately $6.32 billion annually. The table you see contains a comparison of the shortfall estimates to previous estimates expressed in 2009 dollars. Since the previous calculation, which would have been in 2008, the shortfall has increased by 84%. Between 1997 and 2012, the shortfall grew by a cumulative 300%. And this next chart graph shows you that growth. This is this here, the 31.4 is the 1997 review, and where the shortfall was 31.4 billion, and here we are in 2013, where the shortfall is $126.4 billion. Following the observations and the shortfall review, we've provided some suggestions for future planning practice that the MPOs may want to consider as they develop their next round of long-range transportation plans. These suggestions are certainly in no order of importance, and they're not requirements. They're just suggestions to further planning efforts by the MPOs. The first recommendation was to ensure that needs plan projects are appropriate to meet the identified transportation need while advancing the goals and policies of the MPO. In order for the statewide transportation needs estimate to be credible, each MPO must really strive to ensure that identified needs don't include an excess of projects to fill some don't include an excess of projects. They really just want to make sure that their need is focusing on filling transportation demand. And the MPOAC, the MPO's Advisory Council, has developed financial guidelines to help with that effort, and they've asked that each MPO include an estimate of unfunded costs in base year dollars, so that we're not doing a lot of calculations as we've had to do in the past to try and get everybody to the same number. The second recommendation is to determine transit needs beyond the 10-year transit development plan horizon and without consideration of revenue. Although we know, as we noted, some MPOs analyzed their true transit need, many did not. Like roadway needs, transit needs, including the provision for transportation disadvantaged persons, should be developed to meet anticipated demand or regional transportation objectives without consideration of revenue restraints. We also suggested that MPOs be clear about policy and project trade-offs that are made to maximize available revenue, noting that readers of the plan should have a clear understanding of why priority needs are sometimes passed over in favor of other projects. In addition, discussion on how projects are selected for tolls should be included where applicable. as we all anticipate seeing a lot more tolling on new projects throughout the state. We suggested they develop a clear, concise, reader-friendly brochure that clearly identifies planned projects. And certainly while the plans are available on the internet, they're still quite lengthy and sometimes can be too complex for the average reader, or just too much information to try and take in. So it's recommended that a brochure, a fold-out map, or some similar document that's easily mailed and provided at community gathering places is available for people to look at and ensure that the essence of the long-range plan is universally available. We suggested that land use scenario planning to assess if different scenarios may decrease future travel demand should be employed. Although some MPOs are using this mechanism, more could take advantage of this approach. The application of several land use alternatives provides a visual indication of travel demand and therefore provides a greater understanding of potential impacts for decision makers. Providing unified data throughout plans that include more than one county or more than one MPO. So in the case is if you've got more than one MPO or more than one county included in your plan, combining information such as employment, revenue, and project listings would lead to a cost-feasible plan that more fully addresses the integrated needs of the region. Another suggestion is to continue to improve planning for freight movement. The incorporation of freight has certainly gotten a lot more attention since the last review cycle, and MPOs can continue to work with the state as they develop their freight and mobility plan, and also as they continue to try to address their own economic goals. A suggestion is also to, let me change the slide here, to continue to improve on relating how information gained during public involvement activities is used in the LRTP. As noted, the observations section of the observations part earlier, a few MPOs were quite descriptive regarding how they used public information that they received. However, this certainly could be better in some different plans. A reader's clear understanding of how public input is used in the process will encourage future participation. In addition, we suggested that MPOs relying on traditional public workshops for input should broaden their approaches to obtaining public input. In looking at the ETDM, which is Florida's Efficient Transportation Decision-Making Process, we recommend that they try to incorporate more local knowledge along with what's in the ETDM program to ensure a thorough understanding of potential project impacts. We've noticed that there's a lot of leaning on that program at this point in time, and MPOs could make some effort to put some more local input into it, as the strength of the MPO planning is the application of local considerations. A suggestion to increase the discussion of the MPO's role in transportation security. While many address safety, the separation of safety and security in federal requirements really draws attention to security as an individual factor for consideration. And although MPOs may have differing roles in that security, it could be addressed more fully inside of each plan. And the final set of suggestions include increasing consideration of bicycle and pedestrian safety. Those who are in Florida and others probably know that Florida ranks very high on bicycle and pedestrian crashes and fatalities, and suggestions that the MPOs really focus on this area is strong at the state level. We suggest they address transportation infrastructure mitigation and adaptation measures necessitated by climate change. Climate change is certainly increasing weather-related hazards affecting the transportation system, And in addition, rising sea levels may endanger transportation infrastructure, necessitating alternate routes for moving people and goods in the future. And only a few MPOs have actually begun to address that. Finally, as Florida's aging and elderly population grows, increased attention must be paid to how the system works for these users. So we suggested that MPOs consider aging road user safety, access, and mobility. The ability for the elderly to participate in the community will depend on the transportation options they have available to them. In conclusion, just a few statements of conclusion here. We have the MPO long-range transportation plans in Florida continue to develop over time. They're certainly developing in a way that is more reader-friendly and covers a greater number of modes and starts to address land use and livability. The responses to federal and state requirements are increasingly complex and are resulting in better overall plans. So as the rules and regulations become more complex, they certainly are having to put a lot more into the plans. Funding challenges coupled with public desire for more travel choices are guiding planning efforts to be more strategic. Public input certainly is growing and demanding different modes of travel, and MPOs are certainly considering this as they put their plans together. And plan development is increasingly interwoven with other planning efforts, particularly those of the larger region. We're seeing a lot of tying into regional vision plans or regional transportation authority plans. So we're seeing that desire for that economic movement of goods and people across the larger region. Detailed studies on important issues such as freight and hurricane evacuation serve to more clearly define certain needs, and continued attention to plan details as well as complex and emerging issues will increase the value of Florida's MPO long-range transportation plans. That concludes my presentation, and I'd certainly be happy to address any questions you may have.
Thanks, Karen. That was really great. Good presentation. I appreciate that. We have do have a handful of questions that have come in, and for those of you listening, please feel free to submit your questions through the question and answer module. The first question asks if any MPOs that you reviewed had considered automated vehicles, and if not, do you think or do you believe that that'll increase during the next cycle of MPO plans?
That is certainly a great question, because that's the topic I see on a lot of listservs and discussion groups lately. And the answer is no, I don't recall seeing really maybe more than a passing reference to automated vehicles in any plans. So I definitely expect to be seeing that, particularly in the larger urban areas. I expect to see some discussion of the potential impact of automated vehicles. Thank you for that question.
Okay. Looking at our next, we have one more question here that's actually two questions. So I'm going to ask you that in two parts. The first is, can you categorize the shortfall that you described in your presentation by mode? Did the MPOs break that shortfall out by mode, or is it one lump? That's I think the essence of that first question.
I can certainly answer to that. Unfortunately, it's not broken out by mode is the short answer. The longer answer is, because there were 25 plans, there certainly was a percentage of them that was broken out, and we could look at it by mode, but because it wasn't done uniformly for all of the plans, we were unable to report that as a whole for all of the plans, and so we just didn't do it.
Right. Yeah, coming up with a universal number that would go all the way across the state, you would need uniform data from all of the MPOs. That's understandable. The second part of that question was, how many plans are calling for local actions to address the shortfall in their area?
Not many. A few certainly included in their revenue estimates local actions that were known and that they were participating with the local governments in, but there's certainly areas that are showing a high shortfall still that haven't taken advantage of all of the potential local actions that could be made, that are available to them, actually.
Okay. I have another question here.
I'm going to add to that, my answer on that one.
Please.
Another thing that was happening as they were doing these transportation land use scenarios, many of the MPOs were, recognizing in their plan that they don't have any control over land use. However, they wanted to do the scenario testing just to show the difference that could be made. And while some were doing it in concert with the local government, say at the county level, others basically came out with some guidance to local governments saying, if we go with a more infill approach and we start doing development internally, we can take advantage of the capacity that we already have built within the system, and we could be using it. So I think in some cases it was a conversation starter between the MPO and local governments.
Okay, thanks, Karen. Another question is asked is, as you raise the level of expectations for LRTPs, you increase the cost. And did you look in your review at the cost of conducting or developing the LRTPs?
The short answer to that is no. We did not do an analysis of how much each MPO spent on development of the LRTP. We did try to make a note, although we did not include it in the report, of the MPOs that used consultants versus those that developed them in-house. And by and large, there was a great use of consultants for developing the plan, particularly doing the modeling portion, which is a portion that many MPOs don't have the in-house expertise to do that.
I'll admit that I just deleted a question that was asked, and I don't recall what it was, so I want to put that back out to the audience. If you had submitted a question, I think it was related to TDM, I deleted it, and so please feel free to resubmit that question. Another question is, beyond referencing larger regional plans, are any MPOs considering consolidating with neighboring MPOs?
That was not discussed in any of their planning efforts, in their long-range plans. Although I believe, just based on conversations out there right now, I think some are discussing the possibility, but there's still a lot more questions than answers in terms of how that will work and how it can be incentivized and how it can be a benefit to both communities. I think there's a little bit of concern over consolidation will there be winners and losers? Okay,
thanks. Another question, listener, they start with a comment, and I'll read that and then move to the question. It says, it sounds like you're saying that MPOs need to do a better job in scrutinizing needs, in quotes, to be sure they really are needed. This is reference to the needs plan. The question is, do you have any suggestions for doing that or any best practices that you can point to?
I'm going to say that the Florida Department of Transportation has embarked on a study in regard to needs and how needs are defined, and a report on that topic. And I don't know if it's completed yet. I don't know if you know, Jeff, or not, whether they've completed.
I don't believe it's all the way completed yet.
Yeah, so I would be watching for that report to be completed sometime this year in regard to better defining needs.
There's, if I can expand on that response, there's also the MPO, the Florida MPO Advisory Council has also developed a financial guidance document, which is posted on their website. And there is a section, and I believe Karen mentioned that in one of her slides. There is a section in there that does address needs. It isn't full of examples or what to do, but I think there's a kind of a brief discussion on how to consider what is actually needed. You know, and an example might be technology being considered in a transit for a future transit project. Is it appropriate to meet the mobility need, or is it perhaps a overkill given the constraint of funding out there? So it's just thinking about do you really need an outer loop around your city, or can those mobility needs be met in other ways? And I think Karen mentioned throughout here that the MPOs are actually doing a fair amount of work with intelligent transportation systems, other technologies, and operational approaches to try to do some of that. Another question we just got in was, did MPOs run scenarios where work at home rates were at a much higher rate than today? So given the explosion of personal technologies, et cetera, might it not reduce peak period pressures? This is our TDM question.
That is a good question. There was not, I don't recall any specific discussion of that in these past LRTPs, although discussions I've heard of data gathering for this next round of plans, that question has certainly come up. Just in general, the nature of there seems to be fewer vehicle miles of travel going on up there based on things like people telecommuting more and that type of thing is certainly out there, a conversation out there. And actually, Dr. Steve Polsine here at CUTR has recently written a report on this topic, which I would recommend. I don't have the title of it here, but he presented at the TRB MPO Planning Committee subcommittee meeting his paper, and it's listed there. I don't know, Jeff, do you know the title of that paper? I'm sure it's on the CUTR website as well.
Right, I don't have it off the top of my head. I'm sorry.
But it certainly starts to address those issues.
Right. Another question we have is just asking, what are the reasons for that growth in the transportation shortfall? Did you identify any reasons for why it's been going up?
Yeah, I can tell you that the MPO-AC, the MPO Advisory Council, did conduct a detailed study regarding causes for the difference between needs and costs. And that study was called the Transportation Revenue Study, and it's available on the MPOAC website. And what they identified were things like a loss of purchasing power in existing revenue streams that are not tied to inflation. For example, some of our local gas taxes and what have you are not indexed to rise as inflation rises, so they haven't been increased since they were established. So as gas prices go up, people assume that more money is going toward roadways, but that's not the case. More money is going to Exxon Oil, actually. There's a growing market for more fuel-efficient cars. Also the use of hybrids, compressed natural gas, electric vehicles, gasohol, and along with the national emphasis on alternative fuels and technologies is, just making people buy less gas at the pump. So again, those revenues are tied to gas at the pump. There was, for a while, a significant price increase in fuel, which causing people to drive less. There's a public resistance to accept additional user fees. There is more telecommuting. And they identified shifts in demographics that will impact revenues and the demand for transportation services. And in general, changing public attitudes toward environmental sustainability.
Okay, we've just got one more question here. It says, did you see a large discussion on operations and maintenance in the plans you reviewed?
Not a large discussion. There was some discussion in some of the plans, and it actually some went into quite detail about it, and it's a good discussion to have in there because it's the general public often doesn't recognize that a part of transportation planning is maintaining the existing system, and that a substantial amount of dollars that are expended toward that effort every year. And in addition, every time you build another project, build another transportation facility, or add another bus route, there are costs associated with operating and maintaining that system.
I have one final question that's actually related less to the findings of what was in the plans and more to this review itself and the previous reviews. And the question is, have these long-range transportation plan reviews been used by the MPOs in Florida?
What we have seen, that's a good question, what we have seen over time is the incorporation of many of the things that were suggested in previous reviews in the next round of transportation plans. In some cases, it's taken a couple rounds of plans for these changes to be seen, but overall, I would say yes, this certainly helps the MPOs understand what would make their plan better and points them to best practices in other plans, which they then say, oh, I think we could do that too, and they include similar types of analysis in their plans.
Okay.
Without them having to read all 25 plans, they're able to target areas that they have interest in.
Right. That's good. That's all the questions I have. Thank you, Karen, and thank you all in the audience. I'm going to turn it over to Stephanie to close out the webcast today.
Thank you, Jeff and Karen, so much for today's very informative presentation. I would just like to ask you all if you could take a couple minutes to fill out the survey that is being shown on the screen. This presentation is being submitted for AICP credit, and you'll have to provide your name at the end of the survey to qualify for that. Lastly, we have our next CUTR webcast coming up on March 6th, presented by Dr. Chan-Young Lee, who will be presenting about motorcycle crash trends in Florida. Again, I'd like to thank you all for attending today's webcast, and we'll see you again in 2 weeks.